The market labor demand curve is rather uninteresting compared to the supply curve, but we can make a few notations about it. We have the typical downward sloping demand curve as we have on the right hand side right here for the firm's demand for labor, and they know exactly how many workers to hire based on the profit maximizing conditions that we laid out previously. So when we combine supply and demand for labor together, we have an intersection point, and at this intersection point we get the equilibrium wage rate and the equilibrium quantity of labor. Nothing new in this regard. However, because we are working at a competitive market, we know that firms have to take the market price as given or the market wage rate as given because they are price takers. So the individual firm, they see the equilibrium wage rate, they say, okay, I have to pay all my workers this same wage rate, WE here. And at this WE wage rate, I know exactly how many workers I should be hiring in my little firm or in my corporation. And at that point, we hire LE. So here, where the wage rate is exactly equal to the MRPL, which equals the VMPL, which equals the demand curve for the individual firm, we already know all of this, so rather uninteresting for us. What is going to be new for us, as before, is to see exactly what's going to shift our entire demand curve for labor over to the right or over to the left. So once again, the determinants for the market demand for labor. And there are three of them that we can go ahead and take a look at. And it's going to be a rather simple task for us because all three of the determinants that we see right here, they actually all move in the same direction. So let's go ahead and take a look at the determinants of labor demand. Determinants of labor demand. And once again, there's only three of them. We'll only do this in one particular direction. So here we have the wage rate, we have the labor in industry A, labor in industry A, and we want to see exactly what happens to demand as we go from D0 over to D1. We have increases in labor demand. So once again, increases in labor demand. So first determinant that we can go ahead and take a look at are going to be increases in product demand. So increases in product demand. So while it increases in product demand, why are firms and corporations going to have higher demand for labor in their particular industry? Because if there's higher product demand for their goods or services, that means they need to go ahead and produce more. They need to go ahead and ramp up their manufacturing processes. And in order to do so, they need more workers. So if there's higher demand for their products, that means firms are going to need to hire more workers. Therefore, they have higher demand. Next is going to be productivity. So increases in productivity. Increases in productivity. So if workers become a little bit more efficient, a little bit more productive, firms and corporations, they want more of that productive and efficient workers, those efficient workers, so therefore they have higher demand for them as well. If workers become lazy, they become very unproductive, firms and corporations don't want those type of workers, so their demand will actually fall there. And then finally here, we have the most unusual one out of all of them. There we have increases in prices of other inputs. Increases in prices of other inputs. And other inputs, we can say that there's going to be some type of degree of substitutability. So substitutes here, substitutes. And the idea behind this third determinant right here is that there is a degree of substitutability between labor and our other factors of production, say like physical capital or even land and technology. So example of this is, suppose that you are a manager and you are hired to go ahead and dig a hole. You can either do this with your workers or you can do this with a piece of physical capital, say like a backhoe. It would be very easy for you to go ahead and dig a hole with this backhoe, a very large piece of construction equipment, but it could also be fairly costly. What happens if the cost of renting out this backhoe increases by an exorbitant amount? Say it goes from $10 an hour to say maybe $10,000 per hour in order to use this piece of construction equipment. That would tell you as a manager to say that that's not very cost effective. I can go ahead and dig the same hole by hiring more workers. So what are you going to do? You hire more workers, you give each of them a shovel and say, hey, start digging. So that just gets into the idea that there is some degree of substitutability between our factors of production and inputs. And if there are increases in the other factors of production, that means you want to go ahead and go with the more cost-effective factor of production, and that's going to be labor in this instance. So three determinants of labor demand right here. We see increases in labor demand, of course, change it to the opposite signs, change everything underlined to see what happens in the decreasing case. So with all of this, we have one more idea of labor demand that we need to go ahead and take a look at. It's a fairly simple one, but in this section, we take a look at the shifts of labor demand, the determinants of labor demand, as well as equilibrium and the market labor demand and supply curves. So here, where supply and demand intersect with one another, we get equilibrium wages and the equilibrium quantity of labor. And now that we have an understanding of the determinants of demand and determinants of supply, we can see exactly what happens to equilibrium when we have single shifts and simultaneous shifts at the same exact time.